Hi everyone, really pleased to welcome Dr. Daniel Diaz, speaker today from the University of Sao Paulo in functional physiology. Daniel got his PhD through it's a fantastic program called the Sandwich Program, where you start your PhD with your home department and Dr. Salgado in Brazil. And then he went to the University of Iowa and worked with the great Alan King Johnson, a close friend of mine, and went back to Brazil and finished up. And I think it was 2010, this is 2010, so he's a recent graduate. But he, like several of the people that we know, like E.C. Shea and Sarah Hassan, really represent the future in terms of people interested in neuromodulation, modulating the autonomic nervous system. You know, people who don't have like white hair. So Daniel's going to tell us a little bit about why we should be interested in zapping nerves with electricity. Thank you.
So good morning, everyone. Thanks again for the invitation, Dr. Luz. And it is a great pleasure for me to be here. And just a small correction, I got my PhD degree in 2012, but I did part of my PhD abroad in the University of Iowa. So it is a real pleasure for me to be here. And I have been working with electrical stimulation over the years and over the past years. And today I will show you some review regarding the use of electrical stimulation to treat health conditions. And English is not my native language, so I will try to do my best and speak slowly today. And so the title of my presentation is Historical Perspective of Therapeutic Electricity. And it is hard to talk about electricity and don't talk about magnetism because things are very close together. And so I will try to present both evidence on electric stimulation and magnetic stimulation to treat health conditions over years, starting kind of 3,000 years before Christ, and show some evidence nowadays how they are using the electrical stimulation to treat health conditions. So I don't know if you know where is Ribeirão Preto, is the name of my city in Brazil. So here we have South America and we have Brazil. And in the state of São Paulo, this is the city that I am, Ribeirão Preto. It's kind of 600,000 people living there, and it's a very famous place in this kind of study because of the medical school and this kind of thing. So we have several departments studying these things related to medicine and medical sciences. And it's a closer look of Ribeirão Preto. It's a very warm city. It's kind of around 100 or 110 degrees in the summer. So, okay, starting the presentation, we can discuss a little bit about how different civilizations were interested in the treatment of health conditions. It is very funny to see that even the first civilization here, as compared to the last one nowadays, the need for treatments and the development of treatments for health conditions were always a concern for all these civilizations. And if we go very early in the history, to around 3,000 years before Christ, and we check some records on ancient Egyptian medicine, we can see that the Egyptians, they were using some electricity from fish to treat headache and gout. So it was important to note, that even at that time, they realized that the electricity has a lot to do in the treatment of health conditions. And they were able to treat these conditions with these torpedo fishes or these electro fishes. So over the years, the employment of electricity and magnetism is hard to talk about one thing and don't remember the other. Actually, it took almost 2,000 years to do this clear separation. What is electricity and what is magnetism? Things are walking together. So the employment of these techniques has been shown effective in some cases and classified as magicians in others. If you go to the literature and do a quick review, it is very interesting to see that you have a very nice report one day with a lot of scientific evidences and a lot of very strong results. And the other day, and the next day, you can find a lot of evidence that are not very strong. They are kind of based on just tests and something that they call magician. So I tried to put everything together today to show you over years how the employment of electrical stimulation to treat some conditions we're going from a very reliable technique to something that people don't trust because of these magicians and these shows. So here we have a clear demonstration of George Adams showing the electrotherapy machine on a patient. And because of these two steps, the two phases actually. The first phase, okay, you have a lot of reliable and strong results and evidence confirming the use of electrical stimulation. And the other phase is, okay, you have a lot of not very reliable tests and a lot of magician involved. You have this very tiny threshold between myth and truth. So, to the best of my knowledge, the notes from Pliny the Elder in Naturalis Historia, is the same of natural history, are the first records on magnetism as a phenomenon that you can observe. So we have a representation here of his publication. And that was a very interesting experiment, actually, observation that he did. Pliny the Elder tells a story that one day a shepherd was walking in the area that today we know as Turkey. And he was walking and he started feeling some attraction from the ground on the nails of his sandals. And the name of this shepherd was Magnus. And so he realized that something in the ground was attracting the nails of his sandals. And the history about this tells that at that day, the concept of magnetism and the concept of a force that will attract another body was kind of described and created. So here we have a representation of Magnus trying to get his sandals out of the magnetic rock that has a very strong attraction to other bodies, to other metallic bodies. So that's the history about magnetism. And later, Peter Peregrinus did a strong contribution to the understanding of how the magnetism is related to North and South poles. He did a description in Epistula de Magnet in 1269 after Christ, showing that if you place a steel needle, over a spheric body of some magnetic material, you can see some movement of the needle. And the movements of this needle will show some very clear points, very clear directions. And Peter Peregrinus described these two different poles, these two different positions as the north and south poles. So to the best of my knowledge, again, is the first description of a needle interacting with a magnetic body and showing you north and south poles. So the concept of the compass was proposed by Peter Peregrinus. Later on history, we have Paracelsus, again after Christ, around 1500 after Christ. And Paracelsus has a very interesting theory they call the push and pull theory for epilepsy treatment. What he did and what he was trying to do was to place a magnet over the body of the person with epilepsy problems, and the south pole was oriented to the head, and the north pole to the back, to the lower part of the body. And the idea of Paracelsus was that you can kind of push and pull a disease from the body. So you can push the disease from the head and pull the disease from the head, and push the disease away using a magnet. So placing a magnet over the body, you can kind of treat epilepsy of these persons. Okay, later we have to highlight the contribution of William Gilbert. That was a very, very important contribution to the understanding of electricity. Actually, the term electricity and electric, the history says that was created by William Gilbert. And this is the description, the original description in 1628 after Christ. And this study here, the Magnetism, studied the static electricity produced by amber. It is a material that has kind of magnetic power, magnetic force. And amber is the same of electron in Greek and electrum in Latin. So taking this name as the basis, William Gilbert proposed the term electricus and then electric. So if we talk about electricity today, and if we talk about the use of electricity to treat health conditions, we have to remember about William Gilbert and his strong contribution to this field. When I did the whole review, and I was kind of finishing the preparation for this talk, I realized that when you talk about history and when you start reading about the very early reports on any kind of field, it is interesting to see that sometimes you see a clear description for that phenomenon, and then you find a very reliable text showing a different definition for that phenomenon. So because we're talking about something kind of 1,000 years ago or 2,000 years ago, sometimes you have two different versions to the same phenomenon. But I try to put everything together today and show you how the history was developed on this kind of research. And because of these two phases, the very reliable and strong evidence and this kind of magicians, a lot of shows started to be done showing the effect of electricity and magnetism on these treatments. And one of these kind of shows, they call it the Electro Boy, and was done by Francis. And it's a very interesting way to show how the static forces can act on a different body. So the idea was to elevate a small boy in some threads here, and this boy was kind of isolated from the ground, and the boy was charged with some static charge using a special equipment here. So his whole body was charged with electric charge, and then another person just started touching this boy with her hands, and it was possible to see some sparks getting from the boy to this other person. So the boy was kind of charged with a lot of charge, and these charges were going to the next person. So this is the electrical boy experiment that was done by Francis, just to show how you can move charge through a body to another person when you have someone isolated from the ground. And here the best description, or a closer view of the boy on some ropes elevated from the ground, receiving some charge from the charger generator here, and then all the charge going to another person. And going a little bit further in the history, this is a very famous story about Benjamin Franklin and how Benjamin Franklin kind of described or first tested the effect of the electricity and the effect of the electrical charge. And again, there are some reports saying that this is not truth. So this experiment was not done, but I found some evidence showing that, okay, this might be truth. So I'll show you what I found here. In 1752, the history tells that Benjamin Franklin and his son, William Franklin, they were trying to kind of prove the existence of electrical charge. So the idea was to get a kite and connect this kite to a silk thread and start to have this kite afloat in a very stormy day, in a very cloudy day, with thunderstorms and this kind of thing, because the idea was to use this kite as an antenna to get static charge, And all these charges will be conducted by this silk thread, because the silk was wet because of the rain. And using a key in the middle of the silk, you can kind of get all the charges and conduct this charge to a small recipient to storage these charges. So here we have different representations. We have Benjamin Franklin with his son, the kite, the long silk thread, and the key. If you get a closer look, you can see that from this key, you have another thread to this jar. And the name of this jar is Leyden jar. That's a kind of a way to store charges. So the idea was to start flying the kite and wait to a lot of clouds going over the kite and transferring some charge to the kite. And all the charge will go through the silk thread to the key, to the metallic key, and then to this jar. The first question that I made to myself when I saw these pictures, how safe was to do this? How safe was to play with a kite in a thunderstorm day and don't get a kind of electrical shock? But the history that I found was that as the silk thread starting to get wet, Benjamin Franklin and his son, they went inside a barn to don't get wet. So the segment of the thread that was in the hands of Benjamin Franklin was not wet, was dry. So because of that, he was kind of safe inside the barn with a dry piece of silk thread on his hands. And besides that, Benjamin Franklin described some very important concepts, some very important names for the study of electricity. And he described positive, negative, plus, minus, battery, charge, and discharge. So all these terms were kind of created and described by Benjamin Franklin. That's what the history tells. And if we move a little bit from the use of electricity to the concept of bioelectricity, you have to think about Luigi Galvani. In 1780, Luigi Galvani made the pivotal discovery that the muscles of frog legs twitched when he touched the sciatic nerve with two pieces of metal. And at that day, the concept of bioelectricity was kind of proposed and started to be used. There are some reports about the researcher Volta and the contribution of Volta to this kind of understanding, but most of the history tells that Luigi Galvani created this concept of bioelectricity and how the electricity can contribute to the treatment of some health conditions and diseases. And I found also some reports and some descriptions of very crazy products and very crazy ideas on how the magnetism can contribute to the treatment. And I put some of these ideas here. The first one is the electromagnetic hair brush and comb. It was a kind of a hair brush used to brush the hair. And it was intended to treat baldness, dandruff, and headaches. So if you place a lot of magnetic points in the brush and you brush your hair every day, you can treat all these diseases and all these conditions here. So that was the idea of this kind of brush. And moving a little bit to a kind of magnetic vest or magnetic cloth, we have the electromagnetic clothing. And the description here, if you go to the description, you can see that blessing for delicate women and a boon for weak or nervous men. So it was kind of intended to treat everything, and it was very important to keep everyone relaxed in a very steady state. So we have several magnetic points here, and people were kind of intended to use this to treat some conditions. And another way to treat several conditions, the electromagnetic underwear. So this was a kind of whole body underwear with more than 700 points of magnetic materials used to treat and to keep the balance of the body of the person. And there are some reports, actually some evidence showing that the iron in the blood could be affected by the magnetic force, and then acting on the iron in the blood, you can kind of treat some conditions, but some researchers, they don't trust this, they don't think that this is true, but that was the kind of the idea. And lastly, the Wilsonia, that was a vest, a corset and some weights, used to treat sleepiness, nervousness, general debility, indigestion, and some other conditions here, and paralysis also. So if we check all these experiments, we see how the belief in this kind of treatment was important for that person. So not just using the vest or brushing the hair with a special brush, that it was important to believe in the effectiveness of this kind of treatment to have some result. And getting closer to us, so talking a little bit about recent studies, it is important to highlight this study from 1966 from Shelden. That was kind of the first kind of more recent publication on this kind of approach for the electrical stimulation and electrical use to the treatment of conditions. And the title of this publication is Depolarization, the Treatment of Trigeminal Neuralgia. So Shelden was trying to treat some pain conditions, stimulating a branch of this nerve in 1966, and he was kind of successfully done this kind of procedure and was able to treat pain using electrical stimulation. So to the best of my knowledge, this is the first report for the more recent time of the use of electrical stimulation in the treatment of conditions. And I found this slide in the internet, and it's very funny to see that this is completely true. How the treatments and the way people treat conditions changed over time. So we have 2,000 years before Christ and 2,000 years after. So we have basically here, eat this root, and then that root is healthy, say this prayer. That prayer is superstition, drink this potion. That potion is snake oil, swallow this pill. That pill is not effective, take this antibiotic. And that antibiotic is artificial, eat this root. So something going from here to here, kind of you have 4,000 years, and we went to eat this root to eat this root. So it is important to see that the way people treat conditions changed a lot over time. And now we have to think about all the possibilities and try to combine possibilities to treat different health conditions. And the use of electrical stimulation, it is important to this kind of treatment and this kind of strategy. So think about the use of electrical stimulation nowadays, how the reports and how the science is dealing with this kind of approach. If we take the brain and the central nervous system as the main computer, the main processor of this body, and we consider all the peripheral nerves as connection nerves and connection lines actually, and lines that can conduct electricity, we can kind of interact with this system using an external electrical stimulator. So we think about everything together. We think about the main computer as the central nervous system. We think about the lines that will conduct electricity as the peripheral nerves, and you can act on this system using an external stimulator. But to have a successful method and something that really works, you have to combine different professionals and you have to combine different specialists on this. So we have to think about clinicians and molecular biologists that will identify the targets and the targets of the disease. And then we need the participation of neuroscientists that will identify the neural pathway to manipulate the target. And also we need the engineers and the computer scientists that will design the device and prepare the device small enough to be able to implant this device inside the patient or inside an animal to do an experimental test, and then try to treat the initial condition that was identified by the clinician. So it is important to see that you need to combine all these people together and make them work together to identify from the identification, the clear identification of the condition, to the last step when the engineers are developing the device to treat this kind of conditions. And now I will show some reports and some evidence with some brands, and I'm not related to any of these brands, so I will just use these slides and these figures as examples. So I'm not related to any of these brands and manufacturers. So in 2012, because the first question that we start asking is how often and how reliable are these techniques? And if you start asking yourself about how often people use this kind of approach, the clinicians, the medical centers, they implant this kind of equipment to treat conditions. The first time that I asked this, I didn't know how often was these implants made. And then I found this paper, this publication from 2012 from a company, kind of celebrating 100,000 implants of this equipment, this device, on the vagus nerve to do electrical stimulation of the vagus nerve. And then when you see a number like this, you will start thinking, okay, this is not so rare, this is kind of very common, because we have more than 100,000 people walking with electrical devices and this kind of thing. So we have to start looking at this technique because it's getting often employed. And I will show you now some devices that we already have in use. The very famous pacemaker that many patients need to have a kind of steady heart rate level, and the implantable cardioverter defibrillator that can kind of prevent some worse case of change in the rhythm of heart rate, and the electrical stimulator of the carotid area to treat hypertension. If you do a quick review on the treatment of hypertension, there are some patients that they are resistant to any kind of treatment. So you can try a lot of different approaches to treat hypertension, but the pressure is still high. And some patients, they get a lower blood pressure when they have this carotid area stimulated with an electrical stimulator. That's the case. And for Parkinson's disease, the deep brain stimulation has strong results on this kind of disease, this kind of condition. So we can stimulate the patient with this deep brain stimulator to treat Parkinson's disease and prevent some very strong effects of Parkinson's disease. And also to treat depression and epilepsy, you can employ the vagus nerve stimulation, the electrical vagus nerve stimulation, to treat depression and epilepsy. And this is a part of a very nice publication from 2013. And I really like this part of the text. Imagine a day when electrical impulses are a mainstay of medical treatment. Your clinician will administer electroceuticals, not pharmaceuticals, that target individual nerve fibers or specific brain circuits to treat an array of conditions. So if we think about this phrase, it is important to highlight the concept of electroceuticals. It's a new way, a new form to treat different conditions. and you can keep the focus on that condition and try to make the best approach and the best method and protocol to treat only that condition. We know that's very hard to treat one condition and don't have a kind of side effect. We have that with medication and we have that with electrical stimulation, but all people related to this kind of science, they are trying to make protocols better and better and with less side effects and more action on the targets, on the disease. So now I will list some clinical conditions that you can treat the conditions with electrical stimulation. You can treat pain using an electrical stimulator over the shoulder, for example. This is the body of the electrical stimulator, and you have a kind of arc that will kind of spread the energy, spread the electricity to treat the pain. And if you check some results on the perception of pain, if you ask these guys, how are you feeling right now with the stimulator on as compared to the time that the stimulator was off? And these people are saying that the perception of pain is lower when you have the stimulation. And some equipments that do this kind of stimulation for the chronic lower back pain. And almost all these equipments, one day or other, they are tested by the FDA to get kind of cleared by the FDA to be used in patients. And some of these equipments, they are allowed by FDA to be employed in patients. And here we have a system to treat obesity. So you can do electrical stimulation. And it is something like this. You have the mobile charger here, you have the transmit coil, and you have the lead wires and the equipment implanted here. So you can treat obesity using electrical stimulation. And again, to the best of my knowledge, this is the description of actually this is the first report showing the electrical stimulation device approved to treat obesity. So in 2015. We have more than one equipment to treat this kind of condition, and some of them got this kind of clearance from FDA. So there are some publications before this one, but this is a very, very important one. And here are some effects of the use of vagus nerve stimulation on the body mass index, showing that you have a decrease. Here you have the decrease in body mass index and what was the body mass index at baseline. So the higher the body mass index at baseline, the higher the decrease in body weight of these, not in body weight, but in BMI for these people. And not only for depression, epilepsy, Parkinson, or obesity, you can use electrical stimulation to treat heart failure. And in 2008, this publication entitled Long-Term Vagal Stimulation in Patients with Advanced Heart Failure, First Experience in Men. They showed some positive results on how you can employ vagus nerve stimulation to treat heart failure and what kind of benefits you get from this. So this device will will be monitoring heart rate, and the stimulus is discharged 70 milliseconds before the R wave, and there is a kind of a threshold for bradycardia to prevent kind of a strong bradycardia. So you can kind of treat heart failure with this kind of stimulation. This is the device implanted kind of in this area under the shoulder. And you can see the leads going to the vagus nerve. And in this publication, they showed some positive results on how the vagus nerve stimulation can treat heart failure. And they showed that after 3 months of vagus nerve stimulation, the classification of the severity of heart failure was improved here, and the performance in 6-minute walk test was enhanced, and the ejection fraction of these patients was improved following 3 months of vagus nerve stimulation in heart failure patients. As I said before, the use of electrical stimulation for the treatment of hypertension was kind of getting common over years. And in this publication in 2016, the manufacturer here we have 2 equipments from the same manufacturer, but 2 kind of versions of the same equipment. This is the old one with 2 leads, and here you have only 1. And they compared the effects and the results obtained after stimulation with this one and this one. And you have a representation of the previous version, a larger one with 2 leads, so you need the implantation on both sides. And the second generation will have a kind of a smaller equipment and with only 1 lead, so it is kind of a faster and maybe easier implantation, maybe easier surgery. And basically how the blood pressure can be treated and how you can achieve lower levels of blood pressure using this kind of stimulation of the carotid area. So basically you have some sensors in the carotid region, and so you do the stimulation of this area. You have an interaction with the brain, so you can interact with the autonomic nervous system, inhibiting the sympathetic activity and enhancing the parasympathetic activity. And the result of this change in the autonomic nervous system will be lower heart rate, greater vasodilation, lower stiffness of vessels, and some change in the kidney, that when you put everything together, you achieve a lower level of blood pressure. So using electrical stimulation and think about all the aspects related to the electrical stimulation of a tissue, you can achieve lower blood pressure with this kind of approach. So, and here we just have some change in the blood pressure levels during the stimulation, and with no stimulation, then you have lower blood pressure during stimulation and higher blood pressure with no stimulation, showing how you can change the blood pressure and also heart rate with electrical stimulation. So, but especially for the researchers that work with experimental animals, when you are working with mice or rats, you are always trying to make some devices smaller and kind of battery efficient and very cheap to produce. So there are some reports showing kind of nano stimulators that you can implant to treat these kind of conditions. And in this publication from 2004, they described kind of a nano stimulator, kind of 16 millimeters and only 2 millimeters of size. So it's a very tiny stimulator. And I don't know if you can see here, but this tiny white point is the stimulator inside the shoulder of someone. And they were trying to treat a condition in the shoulder using 6 weeks of stimulation, of electrical stimulation, with this very tiny stimulator. And you can check here kind of the initial condition. And 6 weeks after the stimulation, kind of this condition reduced a lot, the patient's getting better. And here, without the electrical stimulation. So using a very tiny device to do the electrical stimulation inside the muscle, you can kind of improve a condition with only 6 weeks of treatment. And this is very important because sometimes the treatment will not work, and it is important to use tiny devices and very reliable device because you don't need to expose that patient to a very large and invasive surgery. And just in case you are testing something that might not work, you didn't expose that patient to a major surgery. So it is important to develop and work on the development of this kind of tiny and reliable device. And another publication from 2015 showing the injectable neurostimulator. So can you imagine one day that someone places a stimulator inside a needle and you just go to the hospital, to the medical doctor, and the doctor just injects a stimulator in your muscle, for example, to treat a condition. So you don't need anesthesia, you don't need any kind of major surgery, you just use a small stimulator. And this paper here, this publication, is showing something about this, the injectable neurostimulator. And it would be something like this. You have a syringe, a needle, and you just place the stimulator inside the needle, and you can inject the stimulator inside the tissue. And this picture shows kind of 3 kinds of stimulators, these injectable stimulators. And the whole thing goes from here to here. So the scale is about 1 millimeter. So the whole thing is kind of 3 millimeters only. So you have battery, you have microprocessor, you have the coil, and you have both leads. Everything in 3 millimeters, and you can place inside a needle. So it's something kind of magic. And this is a real simulator, the StimWave simulator, to treat lower back pain or pain. So you can implant this inside the muscle and do some treatment for pain. And after reviewing all these evidences and all these studies, we started thinking about what should we do to treat different conditions? Should we kind of follow the traditional medicine with pills and with medications and do a lot of molecular studies trying to identify what kind of drug and what kind of combination of drugs can treat a condition? Or should we combine different techniques? Should we use the traditional treatment with medicine and combine this treatment with electrical stimulation? So we are always asking this kind of question, and it is important to study and trying to correlate both techniques, and actually more than 2 techniques, to treat a health condition. And this is the front building, actually a front picture of the building in Brazil. This is the Ribeirão Preto Medical School in the city of Ribeirão Preto. So we have several departments here. This is the Department of Physiology, and you have pharmacology, and you have immunology, and a lot of departments. So it's a very classic building, a very nice building. And again, I'd like to thank so much for Dr. Luz for the invitation. I'm really glad to be here and show you some aspects of neurostimulation and some aspects about the history behind the use of electrical stimulation to treat conditions. And on the first slide, I put my email, so I will be more than happy to receive emails and ask and answer some questions or something like this. So thanks again, Dr. Luz, and it's a great pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Questions, Daniel?
Do you envision a lot of these being the chronic implantations, and when you're using the stimulation to correct pain, or for the example in the shoulder, or
Hi. Ooh, hi. Are you imagining a lot of these therapies to be chronic and permanent, as in the neurostimulation needs to continue, it needs to persist, and if you were to, say, remove the device after the condition had been resolved, then the condition would recur? Or are you, what's your take on that?
Yes, thank you for the question. There are some recent evidences on some kind of biomaterials research, and they are trying to do some materials that kind of will be absorbable by is that the right word? Mm-hmm. That will kind of disappear after implantation. So for example, if you are doing a knee surgery and you need some kind of electrical stimulation in the first 4 or 5 weeks of the surgery, you can, during the surgery, implant a small device that will kind of disappear over time. So you can generate electrical stimulation But over time, the device will disappear. Because for that patient, the importance of electrical stimulation was related to the first weeks after surgery and not forever. So you don't need to make a surgery and make that patient live with a stimulator forever. So you can use kind of a coil that you can stimulate with a kind of external force and do the simulation, and this simulator will kind of disappear. And there are some research also in areas using kind of the energy from the body, kind of from the metabolism, and you can interact this energy from the body to kind of have to be the power source of some simulation, and then you can provide energy to the simulator and treat some condition just for a short time, and then you don't need to live forever with that simulator. That's my thoughts on that.
But for chronic conditions, for like hypertension or something, that would perhaps more likely, require sort of like a pacemaker where you don't really take that out.
Yeah.
Okay.
For the treatment of hypertension, there are some patients that over time, they kind of have lower response to the stimulation, but because it is a major surgery, it is hard to get the electrodes out from the patient. So even with not a very strong result, it is hard to take the simulator out. So sometimes you have to leave the simulator in the patient because it is not safe to try to take this out. So I believe that the investment in this kind of study using kind of not permanent simulators would be very interesting because you don't have to live with that simulator forever if you don't need. So.
Are you aware of any examples where electrical stimulator approaches? Are you aware of any examples where electrical stimulator approaches are combined with medication? The argument being that the purely medical model clearly has many limitations. And one of those limitations is side effects. And generally, the higher the dose of the drug, the more likely the side effects. So if you could combine electrical stimulation with medication in a way which reduced the necessary dose of drug, you might be able to get the maximal benefit with the least side effect. Has anyone explored that possibility?
Thank you. On top of my head, I don't remember any study that they combined the molecular treatment with electrical treatment, trying to see which one would be better to that patient. So, but I really agree with you that that's very important, trying to treat both, using both methods, but I don't remember any study on top of my head that did this.
Roberto?
What's the best way of stimulating?
We have people watching on video, that's why.
Oh, okay, sorry. So, hello everyone, yeah. Great talk, by the way. So I was wondering, there are many ways of stimulating, and in different applications you will need to target not only different nerves, but you will need to stimulate them differently. What's your, what are your thoughts to optimize the stimuli that are delivered? Because you would expect different responses from different protocols, right? Stimulating protocols.
Yes. If you think about, for example, the vagus nerve, and you have the whole nerve with afferent and efferent fibers, and you do the simulation of everything, you start thinking about, okay, but how can I achieve one single effect using this kind of stimulation? And there are some evidence showing that if you combine different intensities of stimulation and different frequencies of stimulation, you can kind of act in one way and not in the other. And you can kind of combine different intensities of stimulation, frequencies, and you can try to change how often you are doing this stimulation. For example, you are doing a 24/7 stimulation, or you are doing just sessions of stimulations. And we did some experimental tests in our lab in Brazil using kind of 24/7 stimulation or just 1 minute on, 1 minute off. And we realized that for our conditions, was kind of better to the nerve to use kind of less frequent stimulation, because kind of was healthier to the nerve, to less current going through the nerve. And another thing that we have to remember is about when you are implanting a simulator, an implantable simulator, you don't have a lot of energy available, because in our case, we are not using a bench stimulator, we are using an implantable simulator, so you have the battery. So you have to think about how strong this battery would be to do the simulation. So you can kind of build a circuit that will provide the same level of stimulation regardless to the impedance or some change in the tissue. So you make sure that the level of condition, the intensity of condition is the same among all patients. Like we do with the regular medication, you give the same medication to a lot of patients, the same kind of amount of milligrams. You want to do the standardization of this kind of electrical stimulation. So it is important to think about intensity, about if you are using a steady current or voltage, the frequency of stimulation, and the width of the square wave or the pulse wave, because you have kind of a larger tissue that you need a larger pulse width or something like this. But that are the aspects related to this.
Anyone else? Well, before we thank Daniel, this is from the FES Center. They've got Rio and the Amazon. We've got Cleveland. So here's a book, and thanks, Daniel.
Thank you so much. Thank you.